session, well, second to last. Our next speaker here is Dr. Pantin from the National Audubon Society.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I know it's past lunch, and so this is the part where on a Sunday you want to just chill out, right? Not be sitting in some little stiff seats. But yes, as she mentioned, I am Marlene Pantin, definitely not an ornithologist, but a trained public health research scientist. But that's another discussion about how I ended up in conservation. So I'm going to be talking about healthy communities for birds and how we used the Plants for Birds program to do that. But I'm also going to dive into some specifics as well to sort of help direct you, and hopefully it can be beneficial to you in your communities. So I know it's so funny, I've attended a few talks today, and we all seem to have these overlapping slides. You go from one to the next, but nevertheless. I do think, though, it's always important to reinforce the message about how we've lost almost 3 billion birds and north of that over the past couple decades. And a lot of that, there are many significant factors, as some folks have mentioned. Cats play a significant role there, but also definitely climate change. Because of the effects of climate change, it is definitely impacting bird survival. In one of our studies that we did using some climate models, we looked at how the species range will shift as the temperature increases, climate temperature increases. And that even what will happen is birds will have to find new areas. But even as they are able to do that, oftentimes as they migrate to these new areas, many of them might not survive. Vulnerable birds might not, definitely, but even when they make it there, they still may not survive for very long. So this is one of the major factors impacting what we are seeing with those numbers. Another one is, if I can get it to move, yes. Another one, of course, is habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. As you can see in this slide, which I love, this is the US. Isn't it beautiful? As I said, this is what we want, except it was 1940, sadly. And there's a lot of green. But what you are seeing is that, oops. Okay. What you are seeing is that over a 75-year period, 1980, first we see some changes here on the East Coast, where you used to have small urban cores surrounded by farms and open lands. You now began to see, of course, more urbanization and suburbanization on the West Coast, the East Coast, a little bit in the middle. And then by the time we get to 2030, this is what it's going to look like, okay? So definitely habitat loss and fragmentation is really impacting the survival of birds, but it's also not good for us. One of those things we need to think about in terms of habitat loss, as I mentioned, is suburbanization. Many of these subdivisions that are being built everywhere are covered in a monoculture of turf grass lawns. They provide nothing for birds, nothing for other animals. In turf grass, we are always talking about getting rid of the crabgrass, right? We are trying to kill off the insects using pesticides. And so that, of course, is impacting bird survival and impacting insects, which 96% of our birds are insectivorous and depend on insects for food. Additionally, yes, there's green trees here, but many of these trees are non-natives. So definitely as well, we find that in these cores, there isn't much for birds. I always want to take a bird's eye, we say the bird's eye view, and I sometimes kind of picture myself like Superman coming down and looking. And the bird coming down and looking and saying, oh, there are trees, and then it gets down there and it realizes, nah, doesn't do much for me, right? That is what's happening here as well. So because of this, this is where the Plants for Birds program came about. We wanted to address this issue that birds could not find habitats. And we know that the importance of native plants actually have deep roots. They're acclimated to the climate. They're acclimated to the local soil conditions. They're acclimated to all of the weather conditions as well. So the benefits of native plants is, of course, they provide resources, But also they reduce the time you spend on maintenance. If you have a turf grass lawn or anything like that, you're putting a lot of time. And if you're using non-natives, you're also spending a lot of money, your hard-earned money, on watering non-natives because they require more water because they are not native, they don't have deep roots. Yes? So these are all some of the benefits of it as well. But additionally, what native plants will do is you're using less pesticides, which is beneficial for us, so there's no runoffs from when it rains if you aren't. And then, as I said, it saves us money. So that is some of the reasons why we have the Plants for Birds program here today. But one of the ways we can see how this has been beneficial is in this photo. One of the things we do in Plants for Birds is we started encouraging everyone to focus on high-impact demonstration gardens. And what that is that we wanted to see more gardens in public spaces, in front of a church, a library, a government building, or whatever. And the reason is simply because more people pass by, it's an opportunity to interact, engage, and educate, okay? And so what you saw here, this is Audubon, South Carolina, and they worked with many partners in the community, the Native Plant Society, for example, residents, and this is at the governor's mansion in South Carolina. They were able to convince the governor in South Carolina to install native plant gardens at this property, and so he agreed. And so this is what they did. So they planted things like phlox and dogwood and ingberries and things like that. And we provided them, of course, and reminded them that, if I can get this to move, no, go forward. Yes. That the native plant database is available, and that's what they used. And the beauty of this was, with our database, you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you the best plants for your local area. Because when you're doing natives, you don't want to just do natives and take something from California that's native there. You want something that's native to your area. And so that's what they did. But as we began to think about it a little bit more, we recognized that it's very difficult to ask everyone to please put some native plants in. That moves too slowly, right? You need to accelerate the pace of what is happening if we want to create healthy communities for birds. Because healthy communities means that they have food, they have shelter, and so we wanted to do that. And so we wanted to create systemic change. We wanted there to be changes not only on the personal and individual level, at your homes, at your backyards, in your little communities, but we wanted to accelerate it all the way to government and impact policy. And so that is where we then decided to go the route of what we call PROS. PROS is an acronym for proclamation, resolution, and ordinances. And the reason we did these is, one, to raise awareness, because you have to assume, even though you and I may know this, many people in your community don't know anything about why native plants are important, why they should plant it, how it saves them money. Elected officials may not know anything. Any other decision maker might not. So we encourage them. Why start a proclamation? It seems so simple, right? Proclamations are just something we hear about and we go, ah, that's so easy. What's the big deal about that? But you can use a proclamation to bring attention to an issue. And so what happened was many of our chapters, centers, we have campus chapters as well. They actually worked, some of them, to get proclamations, and then they would use it as an opportunity to host an event, share it with the media, put it on social media. So that way they got the word out and got more people involved. It also built their confidence, because remember, many folks may not have advocacy experience. They may be intimidated by it. And a proclamation you can usually get pretty simply. So the thing about it was we wanted them, in some cases, to go the easy route. It's sort of a foot in the door, right? You get to meet your elected officials and such. And for that one, it actually only requires one person to sign off. So you can get a proclamation at your town, your city council, your borough council, your county, and your state. Resolution, a little bit more. You need a government body. Maybe your county council will have to do it, a number of members. We've had stuff at the assembly at the state level and then at the Senate level. Unlike a proclamation that is only for a day, you can't use it the next year, a resolution can be longer. It could be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be 3 years. Doesn't matter, right? A resolution has a little bit more impact. The goal is to get everyone to an ordinance in their communities, to pass laws that enforce rules around using native plants on city property, state highways, how developers, if they are in their developments, must use maybe a certain percentage of native plants, things like that. And so we wanted them to ladder up. What has happened through this process is that some groups come in at the proclamation level. That's what they feel they can do. Some come in and say, hey, we don't need to do that. We're going to go to resolutions, and they've done that. Some have done sort of a lateral spread. They actually do proclamations in communities around them, and others have done resolutions in their boroughs and gone all to the different boroughs, because that way they feel that they're building a coalition of elected officials who knows what's going on. And those folks they can then come back to when they want to create change at the state level. And we now have folks now beginning to work on laws. Some of them, they are doing the more simpler route of amending current laws. If there are laws already on the books about land management and things like that, why not amend those laws to be beneficial to use native plants? So that is what is happening there, and we are seeing that in all of those cases. So we talk about the beneficial aspects of PROS, scaling up. The other thing, of course, definitely is about engagement, right? It's important to use it because what has happened now is many of our chapters, centers, state offices have actually found that this process also helps them to build a capacity. They help create new networks, meet new partners, go into communities they would not have normally gone into. If you want to partner with a community, how about going to them and saying, look, we're trying to get a proclamation about native plants, but we know that you're actually fighting to clean up your community. Maybe there's some environmental pollution. We can work together. We encourage them to do that. They meet with decision makers. We've actually found that some of our groups have actually worked, gotten a proclamation, and then the mayor for example, in one instance came back and said, you know what, how about if you guys join our sustainability committee, right? New ordinances and funding streams. We've had folks who've told us that businesses heard about what they were doing, right, and came to them and said, I like this idea of native plants. How about if you plant in front of my business, but I will pay for it, right? They've found that they are building their visibility, but they're also building relationships, and they've also been able to bring in new members through this process. So the PROS is not only beneficial for birds there, and it's beneficial for people, it's beneficial for the groups as well, okay? So what we do is we provide training, and we do a training every year, and everybody loves a goal. So we've set the goal of Earth Day as the day that all of them should work together to get a native plant pro. And so every year they've been doing this. And this year we are doing it the week of the 15th to the 22nd. We provide them with everything, samples of pros, resources, photos, whatever they need, and we provide them a social media toolkit. So they don't have to do a whole lot of lifting, right? An ordinance might take a little bit longer to get, but nevertheless, everyone is working towards this date. Some of them get it in time for the date, some will get it after the fact. What we've seen, success after success. We've gotten some proclamations at the state level here from our executive, the Office of the Executive, and this is in Nassau County in New York, and of course a resolution for Native Plant Week signed by the Assembly as well. I want to mention, because you see this a lot across many of the talks today, that even as we are talking about native plants and habitats and creating these communities, we want to accelerate this, right? We want to make sure that there's more native plants everywhere, that is being used in city properties and state highways, as I mentioned. But we should also recognize that as birds are coming to these places, they have to deal with hazards. They have to deal with the hazards of light pollution, and they have to deal with the hazards of transparent glass and reflective vegetation into those glass. And so that's something we also talk about, reminding folks definitely that when they engage with the community, to talk to homeowners about where they situate their gardens, talk to the state about improving the skies for birds and also buildings as well. Another thing we remind everyone, and they go out and they talk about it, is collisions. Everyone's mentioned today about, you know, the major collision in Chicago and the big buildings, but reminding folks that most collisions happen at buildings 11 stories and below. And so we do keep an eye on that as well. And also, you know, one of the things I believe in is if you're talking to an elected official or anyone in your community, don't just talk about the problem, talk about the solution, right? So we know with habitat loss, we are talking about conserving, habitat conservation, land management, reforestation, and then with glass, we encourage folks to use some of the solutions available, right? Decals and dots and etchings and things like that as well. The result is that means that Plants for Birds is part of what is our larger program, which is called bird-friendly communities. So in addition to Plants for Birds, we also have bird-friendly buildings, and that includes collision work and lights out work. We have also now encouraged our chapters to get pros for these two things. And so they've gone out and done that. They've now been getting resolutions and proclamations in support of reducing light pollution and bird collision as well. So we work interchangeably there. And that the goal then is to pull it all together. What we have seen sometimes is some of our chapters will, or some of our groups will come out and do a pro, let's say the first year for native plants, the second year for something on lights out or bird collision, and then they sort of ladder up, right? The goal is to carry those messages together because that is where it's most effective. So what that has led to is since 2022, we've secured 52 pros, native plant pros and lights out pros, bird collision. And as I mentioned previously as well, we started this a month before the pandemic. And surprisingly, many of our groups, where some of them came back during that year with pros. They did it from home, made the calls, and so forth. We do provide training again, as I want to mention. So therefore, we give them all the instructions. It's pretty straightforward. And therefore, even as they were sitting at home, we were supporting them through this process. We are really happy with this. We just did our new training last week. I'm hoping that we have a few more to add again by Earth Day this year. And the goal is to keep ramping up. Now we have not only folks, chapters, and other groups that are coming in for the first time, but those who've come in a number of times. The other interesting thing I've found is that there are groups who, two things they've told us. When they start working on pros, they'll come to find out, no one will tell them, that an elected official, maybe in a community over or something like that, will go off and do this and don't tell them until they hear that it's passed. So therefore, the message is getting out there as well. So definitely that is happening. And secondly, a number of our groups are so surprised that they've been successful, they've now gone on and started getting pros for other things. So they've moved from resolutions, let's say working on ordinances, and sometimes we don't even know about it until the end. So we know that this is important. If we want to create healthy communities for ourselves and for birds, we definitely have to find a way to accelerate the use of native plants in the public space, in the personal space, and at municipal levels and at state levels as well. Thank you very much.